It's strange how sometimes your world shatters not in private, but on a public stage. I never imagined that the end of my marriage would be broadcast for the world to see, our secrets ripped open like a wound on display. My name is Jason, and up until recently, I thought my wife, Megan, and I were the couple everyone envied. We had our problems, sure. What couple doesn't? But I never thought our cracks would become content for strangers to consume. It all started one Friday morning. I woke up to the usual buzz of notifications, but something was off. My phone was flooded with missed calls, unread texts, and, worst of all, links to a video. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives had sent it to me, some with question marks, others with nothing but stunned silence. My hands trembled as I opened the link. There she was, Megan, sitting on our living room couch, eyes red from crying, speaking into the camera. She wasn't just upset. She was unraveling, pouring out a stream of accusations and confessions that made my head spin. She claimed I was neglectful, emotionally abusive, that I'd betrayed her trust in ways I couldn't even comprehend. Every hurt, every argument we'd ever had was laid bare. Her pain, her version of events, all recorded, edited, and uploaded to her rapidly growing social media following. At first, I thought it was a sick joke. I texted her, no response. I called her, straight to voicemail. Megan was always dramatic, but this felt like something else. It was as if she wanted to make sure I couldn't ignore her pain anymore. That I would have to answer, not just to her, but to everyone we knew. By noon, the video was everywhere. Comments poured in. Strangers picking apart my life, judging me, offering unsolicited advice, telling Megan she was brave, that she deserved better. A few friends tried to defend me, but their voices were drowned out by the tidal wave of outrage. Our private arguments became trending topics. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat there, frozen, watching the woman I loved become someone I no longer recognized. The next few days were a blur. I tried to go to work, but everywhere I turned, there were whispers and side glances. My boss called me in. "Just take a few days off, Jason. Let things cool down." My family group chat exploded, half of them demanding explanations, the other half asking if I was okay. And Megan? She went silent. She didn't come home. She didn't answer my calls. I had no idea where she was, only that our marriage, my entire life, had become a spectator sport. I spent hours replaying that video, analyzing every word. Was she telling the truth? Had I really been that terrible? I knew I wasn't perfect, but the Jason she described wasn't me. At least, not the me I recognized. Still, the seeds of doubt were there, and the world was eager to water them. Nights became torture. I barely slept, haunted by Megan's tear-streaked face and the barrage of hateful comments. I wondered if this was how things ended now, not with a conversation, but with a viral post. On the fourth day, I finally got a text from her. One sentence: "You can have the apartment. I'm staying with friends." It didn't feel like mercy. It felt like exile. I walked through our home, touching the furniture we'd picked out together, staring at photos of happier times. It all felt fake, like props from a show that had been canceled mid-season. But beneath the numbness, something else began to stir. Anger, not just at Megan, but at myself, for letting things get this far, for not seeing the warning signs, for not fighting harder when it mattered. I started digging. I wanted to understand what had happened, what I'd missed. Megan had always been online, always curating her life for an audience. Maybe the truth was hiding in plain sight. I scrolled through her social media, posts that now read like a slow-motion breakup, vague captions about healing, photos with friends I'd never met, hashtags about self-worth and starting over. There were comments from people I didn't recognize, some of them strangely familiar, their usernames popping up again and again. As I dug deeper, patterns emerged. Megan had been talking to someone. A lot. A guy named Chris. I remembered him, barely. An old college friend she'd reconnected with at a reunion last year. I checked their interactions, and my stomach dropped. There was a flirtatious tone, late-night messages, inside jokes that made me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. Suddenly, the story Megan told in her video felt incomplete. I wasn't the only one being judged. For the first time in days, I felt something close to clarity. If Megan wanted to make this public, I would find the truth, and I'd do it my way. But I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. The shock from Megan's video still echoed in my chest, but now a new urgency propelled me. If my life was going to be picked apart by strangers, I needed answers for myself. I didn't want to be the villain in someone else's story, especially if that story was built on half-truths and missing pieces. The apartment was eerily quiet. Every time my phone buzzed, my muscles tensed, expecting another wave of comments or a sudden call from Megan that never came. My inbox filled with "Are you okay?" messages, but also with anger. Some people, even old friends, had taken her side before I had a chance to say a word. It was like living under a spotlight, every move scrutinized by an audience I hadn't invited. I started methodically scrolling through everything Megan had left behind: emails, shared notes, the family calendar. The more I searched, the more it felt like following clues in a scavenger hunt designed by someone who didn't want to be found. Late that night, unable to sleep, I remembered Megan's old iPad. She rarely used it, mostly for recipes or streaming, but it was still linked to her cloud accounts. I powered it up, hoping she hadn't changed her password. To my surprise, it opened on the first try. Inside, her digital life sprawled before me, saved photos, screenshots, and, most importantly, a trove of messages synced from her phone. I hesitated. Was this crossing a line? But after everything she'd done, the way she'd shattered our privacy, I needed the truth. What I found made my heart sink. There were dozens of conversations with Chris, her old friend. At first, it was innocent enough, catching up on life, laughing at memories. But soon the tone shifted. They confided in each other, shared frustrations, inside jokes, and private complaints about me. It was like reading the diary of a marriage's undoing. As I scrolled, their messages grew more intimate, less guarded. I recognized the turning point. A late-night chat after we'd had an argument, Megan pouring her heart out to him, Chris telling her she deserved to be happy, that she shouldn't settle. I saw my wife, lonely and vulnerable, opening doors that should have stayed closed. Then came the photos. Not explicit, but undeniably flirtatious. Selfies from her office, new outfits she wanted his opinion on. Chris responded with compliments, encouragement, subtle lines that, in hindsight, felt rehearsed. He was always there when she needed comfort, always validating her version of events. It was a gut punch, realizing how thoroughly I'd been replaced, not just in her life, but in her confidences, in her hopes and frustrations. For months, Megan had been building a parallel relationship, one she could escape to whenever things at home got hard. I wanted to hate Chris, but mostly I felt hollow. Was I really so hard to talk to? Or had Megan just stopped trying long before I noticed? I took screenshots, forwarding the most damning exchanges to my private email. If Megan wanted to make this public, I wasn't going to be left defenseless. But what was I supposed to do now, out her to the world the way she'd done to me? Was I any better if I stooped to her level? The next morning, I called my friend Sam. He'd been there since college, the kind of friend who never asked for details, just showed up with coffee and a listening ear. We sat at my kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the window, a weird contrast to the storm brewing in my life. I told him everything, about Megan, about Chris, about the messages I'd found. He listened quietly, only interrupting to ask, "Do you want revenge, or do you want answers?" That question stuck with me. Was this about payback, or about finally seeing the truth, no matter how ugly? Sam suggested something I hadn't considered. Talk to Chris. See what he says. Sometimes the other side cracks faster than you think. It felt risky, but the idea gnawed at me. I found Chris's number in Megan's phone records. My fingers hovered over the call button, nerves twisting in my stomach. I finally sent him a text. "We need to talk. You know why." He replied almost instantly. "Let's meet. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Cafe Luna." The next 24 hours crawled by. I rehearsed what I'd say. Part of me wanted to explode. Another part wanted to hear his side. What if he lied? What if he admitted everything? At Cafe Luna, the world kept spinning as if nothing was wrong. Chris was already there, sitting at a corner table, hands folded, eyes downcast. When he looked up, I saw guilt. Not defiance, not bravado, just tired resignation. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, I broke it. "How long?" He exhaled, voice low. "A few months. It started as just talking. Then she leaned on me and I let her. I know I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Sorry." The word echoed, meaningless. I pushed the phone toward him, screen displaying one of the messages. "Did you love her?" Chris shook his head. "I thought I did. But honestly, I think we both just needed to feel wanted." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'll tell you everything. You deserve that much." As he talked, I realized something. This wasn't the story Megan had sold online. This wasn't black and white, no villains, no heroes, just broken people, looking for something outside themselves. When I left the cafe, I felt heavier, but also strangely lighter. The truth, as ugly as it was, felt better than doubt. That night I sat down and wrote Megan an email. Not angry, not accusatory, just honest. I told her I knew everything, that I'd spoken to Chris, that I wanted to hear her side when she was ready. No more fighting in public, no more hiding in private. I hit send and waited for the fallout. The day after I emailed Megan, my mind was a storm of anticipation and anxiety. I kept checking my phone, half hoping, half dreading her reply. The apartment felt even emptier, the silence only interrupted by the occasional ping of a news alert or another message from a concerned friend. By late afternoon, Megan finally responded. Her message was short, but it was something. "Can we talk? In person?" I agreed, and we set a time to meet at our apartment. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, replaying every argument, every loving moment, every suspicion that had brought us here. I didn't know if I was ready to see her. I didn't know what I wanted from the conversation. Closure, reconciliation, or just the truth, finally, face to face. When she walked through the door, Megan looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed with fatigue. There was no dramatic entrance, no defensive posture, just two people, exhausted by the roles they'd been forced to play. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she stood near the kitchen, twisting her hands together. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice thin. "I never wanted things to get so out of control." I nodded, but said nothing. I wanted her to fill the silence. I needed to hear it from her. She continued, "After the last few months, I felt invisible. Like everything I did was for everyone else. My job, this marriage, even my friends. When Chris and I started talking, it was easy. He listened. He made me feel seen. I'm not excusing what happened, but I wanted you to know why." Her words stung, not because they were unfamiliar, but because I recognized them. I remembered moments when I, too, had felt invisible, buried under work, responsibilities, expectations. But I hadn't turned to someone else. I hadn't made our pain public. "Why the video?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "I wasn't thinking, I felt so angry, so lost. I wanted someone to understand how I felt, even if it was strangers on the internet." I regret it. I do. The confession was messy, unpolished, real. I wanted to stay angry, but it was hard. I could see her pain was genuine, even if her choices were wrong. I told her about Chris, how I'd confronted him, what he'd said. She listened, wiping her face, looking more ashamed with every word. "I know I can't take it back," she said. "But I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have." We sat down, finally, across from each other at the dining table. It felt like the last time we'd sit together as husband and wife, not adversaries. We talked for hours, about our marriage, about where things went wrong, about how we'd both changed. The conversation was raw, sometimes angry, sometimes heartbreakingly tender. We grieved the life we'd built and the trust we'd lost. By the end, there were no grand gestures, no promises of reconciliation. Just two people, finally honest, ready to move on, separately. We agreed on the next steps: an amicable divorce, no more public accusations, no more secrets. Megan promised to remove the video and issue a public apology, setting the record straight. It wouldn't erase the damage, but it was something. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet again. The sadness was different now, cleaner, somehow, less poisoned by resentment. I called Sam to tell him how it went. He listened, then said, "You did the right thing, man. That's all you can do." But the fallout wasn't over yet. The next morning, Megan posted a new video, a real apology, not just to me, but to everyone who had gotten caught in our mess. She admitted to her mistakes, explained the context, and asked for forgiveness. The comments were mixed. Some people praised her for her honesty, others criticized her all over again. But the narrative had changed. We weren't caricatures anymore. We were real people, flawed and hurting. Chris texted me later that day, thanking me for not publicly shaming him. He was moving away, starting over. I wished him well, surprised to find that I meant it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm was finally passing. There would be more pain ahead: divorce lawyers, dividing up the life we'd built, dealing with mutual friends who would inevitably pick sides. But the worst of it was behind me. Still, as I looked at the empty apartment, I couldn't help but wonder, what came next? How do you rebuild after such a public unraveling? How do you trust again, love again, when you've seen how quickly things can fall apart? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let this define me. Not forever. That night, I opened a new journal, the first blank page of a new chapter. In the days after Megan's apology, a strange quiet settled over my life. It wasn't the peace I'd hoped for, but more like the calm after a violent storm. Furniture overturned, windows broken, the air still charged with what had passed through. The internet lost interest in our drama as quickly as it had seized on it. There were still comments and a few lingering DMs, but the world was moving on. Now it was just me, my thoughts, and the long road ahead. Divorce proceedings began almost immediately. It was surprisingly civil, both of us exhausted from months of conflict. We split our things without fighting. She took the bookshelves, I took the couch. She wanted the kitchenware, I kept the bed. Some items had too many memories attached, and neither of us wanted them. Those went into boxes for donation, symbols of a life neither of us wanted to revisit. Yet the damage had rippled out further than I realized. My parents were heartbroken, not just for me but for Megan too, whom they'd come to love as a daughter. Friends we'd made as a couple drifted away, some not knowing what to say, others quietly choosing sides. I caught a few awkward glances in the grocery store, the bank, even at the gym. The price of a public collapse is that you become an unwilling minor celebrity in your own town. Sam stuck with me through it all. He came by to help with paperwork, made sure I ate, and, when I was ready, took me out for a beer, pretending not to notice when I stared off into space. "You're allowed to start over," he told me, clinking his glass against mine. "Doesn't matter how public it was. You get to decide what comes next." It was good advice, but easier said than done. The apartment felt emptier by the day. Sometimes I heard echoes of laughter from the past. Movie nights with Megan, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, quiet mornings with coffee on the balcony. The absence stung. The only thing that truly distracted me was work. I threw myself into projects, staying late, volunteering for every new assignment. It was a way to drown out the memories, to prove, to myself, maybe, that I was still capable, still valuable. But even there, the ripples followed me. Some colleagues treated me with kid gloves, others were bluntly curious, a few looked at me with barely concealed judgment. I hated that Megan's narrative had colored everything, turning me into either a victim or a villain, depending on which version people had watched. It was during one particularly long night at the office that I received a message that would change everything. It was from an unfamiliar email, but the subject line caught my eye. "You're not alone." Inside was a short note from a woman named Rachel. She said she'd seen Megan's videos, had gone through something eerily similar with her own ex-husband, and that hearing my side, however briefly, had helped her feel less alone. She offered words of encouragement, then wrote, "If you ever want to talk to someone who gets it, here's my number. No pressure." Oh. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to avoid any more entanglements, but curiosity got the better of me. I replied, thanking her for reaching out, and without thinking much about it, shared a bit of my own struggle. To my surprise, she answered quickly, her tone warm and open. Our email exchange turned into texts, and after a few weeks, a phone call. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, laughing about the absurdity of internet drama, venting about mutual friends who never quite knew how to act. Rachel lived in a different state, far enough that there was no pressure, no expectation, just understanding. Slowly, I began to feel less like a headline and more like a person again. Meanwhile, Megan moved on with her life too. She moved out of town, closer to her family, started seeing a therapist, and, from what I heard, found work at a nonprofit. Our communication dwindled to the occasional email about paperwork or bills, always polite, always brief. One evening, I got a call from Chris. I almost didn't answer, but something told me it was time to close the loop. He sounded nervous, apologetic. He told me he was getting help, that he'd ended things with Megan not long after everything came out. He said he regretted everything and wished he could take it back, but mostly, he hoped I could forgive him. I listened, not because I wanted to make him feel better, but because I needed to know for myself that I could let go. I told him I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him ill. I just wanted to move on. After we hung up, I felt something inside me loosen. The anger, the resentment, the endless replay of what-ifs, it all started to fade. The story that had consumed my life was finally, quietly ending. The world didn't give me closure, but I realized maybe I could give it to myself. That night, I wrote Rachel, "Thank you for reminding me what kindness sounds like." She replied, "It sounds like you're ready for your next chapter." And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. The next few weeks slipped by in a strange, gentle blur. For the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to slow down. No more compulsively checking Megan's social feeds, no more rehearsing old arguments in my head, no more scanning the faces of strangers for judgment. Instead, I filled my days with simple routines, work, walks around the neighborhood, late-night calls with Rachel that stretched into the small hours. Our friendship deepened with surprising ease. She listened when I rambled about nothing. She challenged me when I got stuck in self-pity. Sometimes we traded playlists, sometimes recipes, sometimes the kinds of jokes you only tell people who know how dark it's been. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two survivors of public heartbreak piecing together the shape of new lives. One evening, after a call with Rachel, I put my phone down and looked around my apartment. The boxes from the divorce were gone. The couch, once a battleground, was now just a couch. The silence wasn't so sharp anymore. It felt more like space to breathe. I started noticing small changes in myself. I slept better. I laughed more easily, sometimes even at my own expense. I caught myself whistling on the way to work. One Saturday, I even went out with Sam and a few of our friends for the first time since the breakup. We sat on a rooftop bar watching the city lights flicker, talking about nothing and everything. For a while, I felt almost normal again. But then, as life often does, something unexpected arrived to test my progress. It started with an email from a local journalist. She was writing a piece about online shaming, viral relationship drama, and the fallout that comes when private lives go public. She wanted to talk to me, not just as a victim, but as someone who had found a way to move forward. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. I'd had enough of being a headline. But Rachel encouraged me to reconsider. "Your story could help someone else," she said. "You don't have to share everything, just what you've learned." I spent a sleepless night thinking it over. Was I ready to revisit everything for a wider audience? Was I strong enough to be honest about my mistakes, not just Megan's? In the end, I realized the real story wasn't just about betrayal or humiliation. It was about survival and the messy, imperfect process of healing. So I agreed. I met the journalist at a quiet coffee shop, the same one where I'd confronted Chris weeks before. She asked gentle, thoughtful questions. She let me tell the story on my terms, how Megan's video had detonated my life, how I'd felt lost, angry, ashamed, how I'd eventually confronted the truth, let go of bitterness, and, slowly, found the courage to start over. When the article went live, I braced myself for a new wave of judgment. But what came instead was an outpouring of support. Dozens of emails and messages from strangers who had lived through similar storms. Some shared their stories. Others just said thank you. A few recognized me around town, not with gossip, but with nods of quiet respect. Rachel was right. Telling my story, instead of hiding from it, made me feel lighter. It also made me realize that I was no longer defined by what had happened. I was more than a meme, more than a headline, more than someone's ex-husband. A few days later, Rachel surprised me. She was coming through my city on a work trip and wanted to meet in person. I was nervous. What if the connection we'd built online didn't translate to real life? What if seeing each other, face to face, brought back too many memories of the old pain? But when I met her at the train station, all those worries melted away. She was just as warm, just as real, just as funny in person as she'd been through a screen. We spent the afternoon wandering the city, visiting old bookstores and quirky coffee shops. We talked about everything: her job, my new routine, the weirdness of moving on. There was no grand romance, no Hollywood moment, just two people, grateful to have found a friend who understood the messiness of starting over. When Rachel left, I felt something new blooming inside me. Not love, exactly, but hope. A sense that even after everything, it was possible to trust again. That night, I wrote in my journal, "This isn't the life I planned, but maybe it's the one I'm supposed to have." As I closed the book, I realized I was looking forward to tomorrow, for the first time in a long, long while. The weeks after Rachel's visit felt different, brighter, more open, like spring after a brutal winter. I found myself moving through the city with a new confidence, not because I had everything figured out, but because I no longer cared who might be watching. The fear of being the guy from the video had faded into something distant, almost unreal. My life was my own again. Rachel and I kept in touch, though we were both careful not to force anything. Sometimes we'd go days without talking, then pick up right where we left off. I appreciated that gentle, steady presence. No pressure, no expectations, just a reminder that not everyone in this world wants something from you. Sometimes people just want to listen and to be listened to. Work became a place of stability. I was promoted to lead a new project, a small team, but the kind of responsibility I hadn't trusted myself with in months. For the first time since the scandal broke, I felt respected for who I was now, not who I used to be. Colleagues seemed to look at me differently too, not as a scandal, but as someone who had weathered a storm and come out stronger. Evenings were still lonely sometimes. There were nights when old doubts crept in, when the emptiness of the apartment pressed in from all sides. But the pain was softer now, a dull ache instead of a raw wound. I learned to let myself feel it, then let it go. A big step came when I finally started going out with friends again, dinners, movie nights, even a couple of awkward double dates arranged by well-meaning coworkers. I wasn't looking for anything serious, and neither were the women I met. We laughed, talked, and enjoyed the company. It felt good to be reminded that there was a world outside of my story. One evening, Sam dragged me to an open mic night at a local bar. At first, I wanted to blend into the crowd, just listen. But after a couple of drinks, I found myself signing up, reading a short piece I'd written about resilience, about picking yourself up after everything falls apart. The crowd listened, some nodded, and a few even came up afterward to thank me for sharing. I realized that telling my story out loud, owning it, instead of hiding from it, was the final step in taking my life back. Rachel cheered me on from afar, sending encouraging texts and the occasional meme. We planned another visit, this time with more intention, a weekend getaway to a national park halfway between our cities. We hiked, cooked over a campfire, and talked about everything and nothing. There was an ease between us, a sense of mutual understanding that needed no explanation. On the last night, as we sat watching the stars, Rachel spoke quietly. "You know, it's okay if you're not ready for anything more than this. I'm not sure I am either, but I'm glad we met. I'm glad you didn't let what happened break you." Her words echoed what I'd been feeling. Gratitude, not just for her, but for the chance to start again, on my own terms. Back home, I started volunteering at a local support group for people recovering from public shaming and toxic relationships. My story wasn't unique. There were plenty of others who'd survived their own scandals, betrayals, and heartbreaks. We shared advice, vented frustrations, and most importantly, offered each other hope. I wrote more too, short stories, essays, sometimes just reflections on the bizarre, often brutal, always unpredictable journey life had become. Eventually, I started a blog, mostly anonymous, where I could share my thoughts without worrying about being recognized. To my surprise, people found it. They left comments, shared their own stories, and slowly a small community formed, strangers helping each other through the darkness. Some nights, I would read those comments and feel a deep sense of connection, a reminder that pain, when shared, becomes just a little bit lighter. I hadn't forgiven Megan completely. Maybe I never would. But I no longer felt trapped by what she'd done. My life was bigger than her betrayal. It was filled with new people, new places, new possibilities, and most of all, with a new sense of self-worth that no one could take away. As autumn turned to winter, I realized I was ready to let go of the last piece of the past, the apartment. I found a cozy place across town, smaller but sunnier, with a view of the river and space for a bookshelf and a battered old armchair. It was mine, completely, a place to fill with new memories. On the night before I moved, I stood in the empty living room and whispered a quiet thank you to Megan, to Chris, to Sam, to Rachel, to everyone who had played a part in tearing down the old walls so I could build new ones. I wasn't broken anymore. I was rebuilding. And for the first time, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Moving into my new apartment felt like crossing an invisible finish line, a private celebration of survival, resilience, and growth. The rooms were bright and empty, waiting for new stories. I spent the first morning sipping coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up, feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. I celebrated in my own quiet way. I ordered takeout, unpacked slowly, and let the silence be friendly instead of oppressive. No echoes of old arguments, no memories clinging to the furniture, just sunlight, a battered journal, and the certainty that this chapter was mine to write. Life moved forward, subtly, then all at once. Work picked up, I took on bigger projects, and people seemed to look to me for advice. Sam and I became closer than ever, our friendship burnished by hardship. My parents visited, and, for the first time since everything happened, my mother smiled at me without sadness behind her eyes. Rachel and I kept building our friendship, sometimes drifting into something more, then pulling back, both of us careful and gentle with the raw places inside. Our second weekend trip was easy, fun, long hikes, stargazing, the kind of laughter that doesn't hurt. We were honest about our limits and patient with our hopes. One afternoon, while helping her fix a bookshelf in her apartment, Rachel asked, "Do you think you'll ever tell your whole story, publicly? Your blog's anonymous, but you have a way of helping people. Maybe more people should hear it." I shrugged, not sure if I was ready for that. I used to think I was just the sum of what happened to me, the bad parts, the mistakes, the betrayals. But I think maybe I'm more than that now. Maybe we all are. We left it there, the possibility hanging in the air, gentle and undemanding. The seasons shifted. I marked my divorce's anniversary not with bitterness, but with a day to myself. Museum wandering, a long walk along the river, a new book from a tiny shop where the owner always remembered my name. In the evening, I posted to my blog, "You're not the worst thing that's happened to you. Your scars aren't a story's ending. They're proof you survived long enough to see a new chapter." The response was overwhelming. Emails and messages from readers poured in, some thanking me, others sharing their own wounds and hopes. I realized that, in healing myself, I'd created a place for others to heal too. One night, I got an unexpected call. It was Megan. Her voice was steady, softer than I remembered. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "Not for what happened, but for how you handled it after. I've been working on myself too. I hope you're happy." I told her I was, genuinely. I wished her well, and for the first time, I meant it with my whole heart. We said goodbye, a real one, with closure instead of anger. That conversation felt like the last thread tying me to my old life. Afterward, I sat on my balcony, letting the night settle around me. I thought about forgiveness, about how it isn't something you grant for others, but a gift you give yourself, a way to set down the burden and move on. Rachel visited the next weekend. We made dinner together, watched bad movies, talked until late. When she left, I realized I wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. The future felt open, inviting, unpredictable in the best possible way. Months passed. I kept writing, kept living, kept learning to trust again. I made new friends, traveled, tried things I'd always put off. The scars remained, but they didn't ache the way they used to. They were just part of the story, reminders of how far I'd come. Looking back, I realized the journey wasn't about surviving a betrayal or proving anything to the world. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece, and finding joy in places I'd forgotten to look. The pain, the scandal, the viral outrage, they were just the storm before the calm. What mattered was what I did after. As I finish this chapter, I want you, the listener, the reader, the fellow survivor, to know. Whatever storm you're facing, it will pass. You'll find yourself again, maybe even better than before. You're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found any hope or comfort here, I hope you'll pass it on. Because sometimes, the best endings are simply new beginnings in disguise.